My daughter stood at her wedding and thanked her mother, her stepdad, and her friends for shaping her into who she is. I sat in the audience, waiting for my name, but it never came. I smiled anyway. I always do. But what happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to John Keene from Miami. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. My name is Daniel, and I suppose the only thing I ever really wanted was to be the kind of father whose absence could never be mistaken for neglect. I'm an architect by trade. My life built around careful measurements, neat lines, and invisible supports that keep everything standing. That's what I thought I was doing with my daughter, Emily, laying the foundation she could always come back to. But I suppose even the strongest beams can be ripped out if someone's determined enough to erase you from the story. I watched her wedding from the back row, a seat that felt more like an exile than a courtesy. I was there. My name etched in the program, my face caught in the wedding photographer's lens, but in every word she spoke to that gathered crowd, I was nowhere. She stood there in white, radiant and trembling, and she thanked everyone who had shaped her, her mother, her stepfather Mark, her friends, her mentors. My name hovered on the tip of her tongue. I could swear it, but it never crossed her lips. I smiled anyway. I always do. My smile is the last refuge I have left in a world that's been slowly closing its doors on me. You ever been in that kind of silence? The kind that tastes like blood in your mouth because you're biting down so hard not to scream? That's the kind of silence I was in, surrounded by people who would never see me as more than the man who used to be her father. They didn't know about the nights I sat at her bedside with a cold washcloth, coaxing her fever down in the darkness. They didn't know about the mornings I left sticky notes on her mirror to remind her that she was strong and beautiful. They didn't know because they didn't want to. Mark was easier. Mark was there in the bright lights and the curated family photos, and I was just a cautionary tale she'd outgrown. I held my glass when they toasted her new life, my fingers tight around the stem like it might shatter if I let go. I watched her dance with her new father. I watched her mother's smile. A smile that used to be mine, and I let the ache settle in my chest like a stone dropped in a still lake. I didn't flinch, not once, because even in that moment, I knew that I was still the architect of her beginning, whether she remembered it or not. But that night, as the music played and the laughter rolled around me like smoke, I realized something. I had been too willing to be erased. I had let them take my place because I thought it was better for her to have a clean story. No jagged edges, no inconvenient truths. I thought love was about sacrifice, about standing back so she could be happy. But standing back had turned me into a ghost. And ghosts don't get thanked in speeches. I drove home alone, my hands steady on the wheel, the night pressing in like a weight. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just let the memory of that missing name settle into my bones. And in that quiet, something inside me shifted. Because maybe I didn't need her gratitude to be her father. Maybe I just needed to remind her, and everyone else, what it costs to erase a man who's still very much alive. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark of my living room, the wedding program on the coffee table, the ink of my name staring back at me like a joke. I thought about all the things I'd let go of, all the ways I'd tried to keep the peace. And I realized I wasn't done. I wasn't finished being her father, even if she didn't want me to be. And I sure as hell wasn't finished being a man who wouldn't let himself be written out of the story he built. I know what you're thinking. Why not just let it go? Why not be the bigger man and walk away? But you see, that's the thing about building foundations. You can't just walk away when the house you built is still standing on them. If they want to pretend I'm not there, fine. But I'm done pretending. I'm done smiling in the shadows while they hand out credit to men who only showed up when it was convenient. You ever feel that kind of quiet anger? The kind that doesn't burn so much as it chills you to the bone? That's what I felt in that empty house. The echoes of laughter from a wedding I wasn't really part of still buzzing in my ears. And I decided, no more. No more polite smiles. No more backing down. If they wanted to rewrite my story, I'd write it back in my own hand, one careful line at a time. And so that night, I poured myself a drink, raised it to the ceiling like a silent toast, and made a promise. They would remember me. Even if they never spoke my name out loud again, they would remember. Because the truth has a way of clawing its way back to the surface, no matter how deep you bury it. And I was ready to dig. I didn't tell anyone where I was going when I left that night. I just drove, my mind a hollow echo of everything I didn't say at the wedding. I ended up at the cabin by the lake, the one Emily and I used to go to every summer when she was little. It's a small, weathered place, but it's mine. No one else's fingerprints on the walls, no staged photos or polite laughter to fill the air. Just the quiet creak of the old floorboards and the smell of pine sap in the warm wind. I hadn't been there in years, but I still had a key. I still had a place no one else could touch. You ever have a place like that? Somewhere that holds your memories like a secret no one else can pry open? That's what this cabin was for me. It was where Emily learned to fish, where she scraped her knees climbing the rocks, where she whispered to me in the dark that she was scared of thunderstorms. That's what I held on to as I crossed the threshold, the wedding program folded in my pocket like a wound that wouldn't heal. The lake was still that night, moonlight turning the water to liquid silver. I stood on the porch and watched it, letting the cold seep into my bones. It was a different kind of quiet here, one that didn't demand anything from me. In the city, every smile felt like a negotiation, every polite nod a test of how much I was willing to give up to keep the peace. Out here, there was no one to smile for but myself. I spent that first night going through the old boxes I kept tucked away in the closet. Photos of Emily in her red raincoat, Father's Day cards she made me when she was 6, a lopsided clay mug she'd made in 3rd grade that still had the ghost of her handprint on the handle. Each piece was a testament to the years I'd spent building her world. Each piece was a reminder that I was more than a footnote in someone else's story. But the more I sifted through those memories, the more I saw the pattern. The birthday party I wasn't invited to because her mother thought it would confuse her. The piano recital where Mark's hand was the one she reached for when she took her bow. The graduation speech where she called him the man who taught me how to be brave. I saw it all, how each year they took another piece of me and gave it to someone else. And I realized that being silent had never been about keeping the peace. It had been about survival. About making sure I didn't become the angry ex, the bitter father, the man who couldn't let go. But there's a difference between letting go and being erased. And I wasn't about to let them finish what they started. I started making notes, names, dates, the quiet details that added up to something bigger. I didn't know what I was going to do with it all yet, but I knew I had to do something. The withdrawal wasn't about disappearing, it was about gathering strength. About pulling back so I could see the full picture, the cracks and the flaws they thought no one would notice. Because when you're too close to the house you built, you can't always see the rod in the foundation. But out here, in the stillness of the cabin, I saw it clear as day. Emily didn't answer my calls. I didn't expect her to. I left voicemails anyway, my voice calm and steady even as my heart rattled in my chest. I didn't beg. I didn't apologize. I just let her know I was still here, whether she wanted me to be or not. And in those messages, I felt something shift, like I was reclaiming a part of myself I'd let her mother and Mark carve away, piece by piece. I spent my days walking the trails around the lake, the crunch of pine needles under my boots grounding me in something real. At night, I sat at the small wooden table in the cabin, the old lantern throwing flickering shadows on the walls, and I wrote. I wrote down every memory they tried to bury, every kindness they turned into a weapon. I wrote until the pen dug grooves in my fingers and the words blurred on the page. Because I knew this was more than just memory, it was proof. Proof that I had been there. Proof that I mattered. You ever feel that kind of purpose? The kind that settles into your bones like a second skin, makes you sharper, clearer? That's what I felt in that cabin. The quiet wasn't loneliness, it was clarity. The first time in years I could hear my own thoughts without someone else's story drowning them out. I didn't know how this would end. I didn't know if Emily would ever see me the way she used to, if she'd ever understand how much of me was in the woman she'd become. But I knew I couldn't let them write me out without a fight. I had given her everything I had. And now, I was ready to take back the parts of me they tried to turn to dust. That's the thing about being the man no one notices. You learn how to move in the shadows. You learn how to watch, how to wait, how to strike when no one sees you coming. And I was done waiting to be remembered. I woke up every morning in that cabin with the kind of focus I hadn't felt in years. The world outside was quiet. No polite conversations, no forced laughter, just the sound of the wind in the pines and the soft lapping of the lake against the rocks. And in that stillness, I could finally see the shape of the story I needed to tell. It wasn't enough to remember. It wasn't enough to be sure in my own mind. I needed proof. I needed leverage. I needed to show them all that I wasn't the absent father they'd painted me to be. I started by digging through the files I kept in a locked drawer back in the city, old tax returns, joint bank statements, letters from teachers and doctors. Every scrap of paper that proved I was there, that I showed up, even when they tried to make it seem like I hadn't. I found emails I'd forgotten about. Emily's first essay she sent me to read, the late-night messages she wrote when she was scared and alone in her college dorm room. I printed them all out, each one a brick in the wall I was building to stand against their lies. I kept my movements quiet, deliberate. I didn't post about it, didn't tell a soul. This wasn't about making a scene, it was about making sure the truth was undeniable when the time came. I learned that a single moment of doubt is sometimes all it takes to crack the story someone's been telling for years. And I was going to be that crack. I made calls to old friends, people who'd been there in the early years, who remembered the way Emily used to light up when she saw me walk through the door. I didn't ask them to pick sides, I just asked them to remember. The ones who really knew us didn't hesitate. They told me things I'd almost forgotten myself. Like the night I slept in a hospital chair when she had that stomach flu at 6, or how I coached her soccer team when no one else would step up. Little things, but they were pieces of me she'd been taught to forget. You ever notice how the smallest details can undo the biggest lies? That's what I was counting on. Because I knew Emily had been fed a story where I was the one who walked away. But stories are fragile when they're built on half-truths. And I was done letting my silence be the mortar that held those lies together. One night, I found the boarding school brochure Emily had sent me when she was 15. She'd written a note in the margin, "Dad, I'm scared, but I think I need this." I told her I'd support whatever she needed, even if it meant being farther away from me. That was the last time she asked for my help before her mother and Mark stepped in, before they turned every choice she made into a testament to how much better off she was without me. I ran my thumb over her handwriting, that slant of letters that still felt like a part of her I'd never stopped loving. And I realized this was more than memory. This was the beginning of the story they never wanted her to see. I kept that brochure on the cabin's small table, a totem of everything they tried to bury. I started laying out the pieces around it, photos, emails, old letters. Each one a quiet defiance. Each one a reminder that I was still here, no matter how carefully they tried to erase me. I knew it wouldn't be enough just to confront them. People like my ex-wife and Mark, they're masters at spinning the truth into something that suits them. I'd seen it too many times. How they'd twist my anger into proof that I was unstable, how they'd turn my silence into guilt. But I also knew they couldn't twist the facts if I held them up to the light. They couldn't bury what was already out in the open. You ever feel that cold certainty in your gut? That moment when you stop hoping things will work out and start knowing you're going to make them? That's what I felt every night I sat at that table, the lamp flickering, my breath fogging the glass of whiskey in my hand. I wasn't going to ask for my place back. I was going to take it. I thought about the last time I saw Emily before the wedding, how she'd hugged me like she was hugging a ghost, how she'd looked me in the eyes and smiled, but there was a flicker of something else there, a hesitation, maybe even guilt. I clung to that flicker, because if there was even a crack in her certainty, that meant there was still a part of her that remembered the truth. I just had to make her see it. And so I planned. Every day, every night, I gathered my evidence. I rehearsed what I'd say if I ever got the chance. Not a plea, not a demand, just the truth, laid bare and undeniable. I knew it would hurt her. I knew it would break the careful story she'd built around her new family. But I also knew that sometimes the only way to heal is to tear out the rod, no matter how deep it goes. I didn't know if Emily would ever forgive me for it. But forgiveness was never the point. The point was to reclaim my name, to take back the seat at the table they tried to give to someone else. The point was to show her that I was still here, still her father, no matter how many times they tried to rewrite that truth. And if they didn't like it, if they wanted to keep pretending, let them. I learned to build things that lasted. And the story I was about to tell, it would last longer than their lies. I didn't storm back into Emily's life the way some men might. There were no grand gestures, no shouting matches. I understood that if I wanted to tear down the story they'd built around me, I couldn't give them a single excuse to dismiss me as angry or bitter. I had to move carefully, like the architect I'd always been. Each step calculated, every piece placed with quiet precision. I started with small things. I sent Emily a letter, handwritten on thick, cream paper. The kind that feels too heavy to ignore. I didn't ask for anything in it. I didn't demand she see me. I just told her one story. The night she was 7 and woke up from a nightmare. How she crawled into my lap and fell back to sleep with her head on my chest. How I stayed awake all night so she'd know she was safe. I signed it simply, Dad. No plea, no apology, just the memory, offered like a hand reaching through the fog. I didn't hear back, but I didn't need to. I knew she read it, and I knew it would sit in her mind like a splinter. Because that's what the truth does. It doesn't shout. It whispers until you can't ignore it anymore. I showed up at family gatherings, not because I was invited, but because I knew I had every right to be there. Birthdays, barbecues, the kind of events where people tell themselves they're a family. I was always polite, always smiling. I brought small gifts. Nothing showy, just things that reminded Emily of the world we'd once shared. A book she loved as a child, a jar of lake stones from the place we used to swim. I saw the confusion in her eyes, the way she tried to square the father she'd been told to forget with the man standing in front of her, unruffled and calm. Mark was the first to show his discomfort. I saw it in the way his smile tightened every time I spoke, in the way he put his hand on Emily's shoulder like she was a piece of property he had to protect. He didn't confront me directly. He's too smart for that. But he tried to box me out in smaller ways. Passive-aggressive jokes, sudden changes in plans, always trying to remind me that he was the one who'd been there for the milestones I'd been pushed out of. I let him think he was winning. Because I knew every quiet word I spoke was a wedge, every small kindness a reminder that he couldn't rewrite the past no matter how hard he tried. And I could see it in Emily, the way her eyes would flicker when I told a story she didn't remember, or when I laughed at something only she and I would understand. She was starting to see the cracks, even if she didn't want to. I kept building my case in the background, too. I tracked down old emails, old videos. Footage of me teaching her how to ride a bike, her squeals of laughter echoing down the sidewalk. I knew Mark and my ex-wife couldn't erase that. It was there, unfiltered, undeniable. And I knew one day I'd show it to her. One day, I'd lay it all out and watch the walls come down. You ever feel that kind of power? The kind that doesn't come from rage or violence, but from the quiet certainty that you're right, that the truth is on your side? That's what I felt every time I saw them squirm under my calm. They thought they'd buried me, but I was right there, standing in the open. And they couldn't touch me because they knew if they did, it would only prove what I was saying all along. I started sending Emily small messages, nothing direct, nothing she could dismiss as manipulative. Just stories, memories. A photo of the treehouse we built together, a video of her first piano recital, my quiet voice telling her how proud I was. I let her see me not as the man they'd warned her about, but as the man she used to love, the man who never stopped being her father. And I could see her mind shifting, even if she wouldn't admit it out loud. Mark tried to talk to me once, to clear the air. He cornered me at a barbecue, his tone all false concern. He told me Emily was happy, that she didn't need me dredging up the past. I just smiled, let him talk. And when he was done, I looked him in the eye and said, I'm not here for you. I'm here for her. His face tightened, and I knew he understood. I wasn't going away. I wasn't letting him win. I knew Emily was still figuring out where she stood in all of this. She was trying to be loyal, trying to keep the peace the way she'd been taught to. But I also knew that loyalty built on lies is fragile. And I was patient. I'd built houses that could stand for centuries. I could wait for her to see the truth. At night, I lay in bed at the cabin, the smell of the lake drifting through the open window, and I let myself imagine how it would feel when she finally looked at me and saw me. Not the father she'd been told to forget, but the man who had always been there, even when no one else believed it. I didn't need her to thank me. I didn't need her to love me the way she used to. I just needed her to know that I'd never stop being hers. Because revenge doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes it looks like a man standing in the doorway, calm and unshakable, refusing to be erased. And I was done being quiet. The dinner where it all came to a head was supposed to be nothing special. Just another gathering, another polite affair where I was expected to smile and fade into the background. I could see it in my ex-wife's tight grin, in the way Mark hovered over Emily like he was the gatekeeper to her past and future. But I wasn't there to play along anymore. I was there to reclaim the part of me they tried to bury. I walked in with nothing but a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you have the truth on your side. I brought a box with me, nothing big, just a plain wooden box I'd found in the attic of the cabin, the same place where Emily and I had once spent endless summer nights catching fireflies. That box was heavy with memories, photos, letters, scraps of the life I'd lived with her before they rewrote the story. I didn't wave it around. I didn't threaten. I just set it on the sideboard, a silent promise that I wouldn't be silenced anymore. The dinner itself was all forced laughter and careful words, the way these gatherings always were. Emily tried to smile, but her eyes kept flicking to the box like it was a ticking clock she couldn't ignore. Mark kept his hand on her back, his thumb brushing the fabric of her dress in a gesture that said, "I'm here. I'm in control." My ex-wife watched me with that brittle calm, her fork tapping against the plate like a metronome counting down to the moment when everything would break. I waited until dessert was served, the clink of silverware echoing in the quiet. And then I spoke. My voice was calm, measured, no anger, no accusation. Just the truth. "I brought something," I said. "Things I thought Emily might want to see. Things I thought you all should remember." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Daniel, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I said softly. "You've all had your turn to tell this story. Now it's mine." I opened the box slowly, pulling out a photo of Emily at 4 years old, her face smeared with ice cream, her laughter bright and unguarded. I set it on the table, the silence around me growing thick. Then a letter she'd written me when she was 10, telling me I was her hero. Then a drawing she made of the two of us in the treehouse, her handwriting shaky but certain. Me and Daddy, forever. I saw Emily's face change as I laid them out. The confusion, the flicker of recognition, the way her hands trembled on the tablecloth. Mark shifted beside her, his jaw tight, his breath coming faster. My ex-wife tried to speak, but I cut her off with a glance. "Not tonight. Tonight, the truth had the floor. You've all told yourselves I walked away," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "You've all made yourselves comfortable in that story. But you forgot something. I never stopped being here. I never stopped being her father." Emily swallowed, her lips parting like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. I let the silence hang between us, heavy and raw. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it's enough to let it sit in the open, undeniable. Mark finally spoke, his voice tight. "This isn't helping anyone, Daniel. You're just dredging up old wounds." "No," I said. "I'm healing them. Because she deserves to know the whole story, not just the one that makes you look good." My ex-wife reached for Emily's hand, but Emily pulled it away, her eyes locked on mine. I saw the tears gathering, the way her breath caught in her throat. And I knew in that moment that I'd broken through, that everything they'd built to keep me out was crumbling. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm not here to take anything from you. But I won't be erased. I won't let you pretend I wasn't there when she needed me. I won't let you turn me into a ghost." Emily's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the room like a knife. "Why didn't you ever say this before?" I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Because I thought it was better to let you be happy. I thought if I kept the peace, you'd find your way back to me on your own. But I see now that silence only lets lies grow. And I'm done being silent." The room was so quiet I could hear the tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall. Mark looked like he wanted to say something else, but he stayed quiet. My ex-wife's eyes were wet, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of every lie she'd ever told. And Emily. Emily just looked at me, her face a map of every memory they'd tried to take from her. I stood then, gathering the photos and letters back into the box. "I'll leave these here," I said. "You can look at them when you're ready, or you can throw them away. But they're yours. And so am I." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I walked out of that room with my head high, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders with every step. Because revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be cruel. Sometimes, the most devastating thing you can do is simply refuse to be forgotten. The night after that dinner, I didn't go back to the cabin. I didn't want to sit in the dark again, alone with the ghosts of every word I'd never said. Instead, I drove back to the city, to the small apartment I'd been renting since the divorce. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No borrowed memories, no shadows of what used to be. Just me, and the quiet promise I'd made to myself. I would not be erased. I left the box with Emily, knowing it would do its work long after I was gone. The truth is like that. It doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. It lingers in the silence, in the spaces between what people think they know and what they can't quite forget. And I was done forcing anyone to see it. I'd given her the truth. The rest was up to her. I didn't hear from Emily for 3 days. 3 days of radio silence, of waiting with that quiet ache in my chest that never really goes away. I kept busy, sorting through the last of my old files, cleaning out the drawers that still held scraps of the life I'd tried so hard to keep neat. I didn't need the reminders anymore. I didn't need the echoes of a man I'd outgrown. I was building something new, and it didn't have room for the weight of old wounds. On the 4th day, my phone rang. It was her number, the name I still had saved as my girl, even though she hadn't called me that in years. My hand shook as I picked up, but my voice was steady. "Hello, Emily." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, the way the silence crackled like static. And then she spoke, her voice low and trembling. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know." I closed my eyes, let her words wash over me. Not an apology, not really, but the first crack in the wall between us. And that was enough. "I know," I said softly. "I know you didn't." She was crying. I could hear it in the hitch of her breath, the way she tried to swallow the sound. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "I didn't show you those things to hurt you. I just wanted you to see me. The real me." Another silence, but this one wasn't empty. It was heavy with all the things we'd never said, all the ways we'd been taught to keep the peace by burying the past. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a door opening, a chance to rebuild. "I don't know how to fix it," she said finally. "You don't have to fix it," I said. "Just don't forget me." I heard her breath catch, the smallest, quietest sob, and I knew she understood. That was enough. We didn't talk long. She said she needed time. I told her I understood. Because I did. You can't force someone to see you the way you want to be seen. You can only stand there, quietly, and refuse to disappear. And that's what I'd done. When I hung up, I sat in the stillness of my apartment, the weight of the past finally off my shoulders. I realized then that revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about reclaiming myself. About refusing to let their story be the only story that mattered. And I'd done that. I'd given her the truth, and I'd given myself the freedom to stop fighting for a place in a family that had never really been mine. A few weeks later, Emily sent me a message. Just one line. "I'm coming up to the cabin. I want to see it again." No apology, no promises. Just the smallest opening. And that was all I needed. Because I learned that sometimes the most powerful revenge is not to tear down what they've built, but to build something stronger for yourself. Something they can't touch. The day she arrived at the cabin, I stood on the porch and watched her car pull in, the dust rising behind her like a memory I was finally ready to let go. She stepped out, her hair caught by the wind off the lake, and for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who trusted me to catch her when she jumped from the dock. The one who believed I was her hero. And I realized I didn't need her to call me that again. I didn't need her to make speeches or take my side. I just needed her to see me standing there, steady and unbroken. We didn't talk much that day. We sat on the porch, watching the sun sink into the water and let the quiet wrap around us like an old friend. She told me about her life, the things she was afraid to admit even to herself. I told her about mine, the small joys I'd found in the years since we drifted apart. And in that gentle conversation, I saw the shape of something new, something built on truth, not obligation. You ever have a moment like that? When you realize that the fight is over, not because you've won, but because you've decided to stop letting them hold the knife to your throat. That's what I felt sitting there beside her. I wasn't the man they'd painted me to be. I wasn't the ghost they tried to make me. I was her father, flawed and human, and I was done hiding. When the sun slipped below the horizon, she turned to me, her eyes soft. "Thank you," she said. Just those 2 words. But they meant everything. I smiled an honest smile, the first in a long time. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "I'm just glad you're here." Because in the end, that's all I'd ever wanted. Not to be the hero, not to be the man they needed me to be. Just to be here. Unapologetic, undeniable. And in that quiet moment, I realized I'd already won. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of how important it is to stand your ground and be heard, then stick around. I share quiet, powerful stories like this every day. Stories about family, betrayal, and finding your way back to the truth. Hit subscribe. Let's keep listening to each other. See you soon in the next story.